Hello.
This is Stuart Struever once again, and we're sitting here having a little conversation. Who? We have Mr. Adolph and Frank Kenny and their son Bill, the people who allowed us to go onto their farm down at McNabb, Illinois, and dig up an ancient Indian village almost 2,000 years old. If you have a little time, sit down and listen in with us when we talk about how a group of people dig up a farm. But first, let's have a word from Karis Chemical.
The Karis Chemical Company in LaSalle has been in the Tri-Cities for many years. They've done much to make local residents proud of them. Karis Chemical Company stands for those things which have made this country great. They've always maintained a high level of employment, wages, and opportunity. Karis Chemical Company is proud to be in this area, proud to be associated with the kinds of Americans who live here. They're proud, too, that so many as our company. Karis Chemical Company produces hydroquinine, manganese sulfate, and the country's only producer of potassium permanganate for better living for a better America. Now, Stuart Struever.
I think to begin our conversation today, it would be good to tell everyone just where your farm is and about how long ago the Kenny family or their related peoples arrived down there. Frank, when did your relatives first come to the farm you're on now?
About 100 years ago.
About 100 years ago? That's a long time ago. And the Kennys have been living there just about ever since that time, or people related to the Kennys. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And how the generation now, Bill here, was 12 years old. Is he, what, the fourth generation, or?
Fourth.
He's the fourth, or is he the fifth?
Fourth.
Oh, he's the fifth.
He's actually the fifth generation of the family down on the farm. On the same farm, is that right?
That was the same.
And I'd like to ask you another question, if I may, Frank, and that is, how long ago did you start picking up these relics down here?
Oh, ever since I've been a boy.
And did your grandfather or anyone else find them down there at all?
Well, they found them, but they didn't bother with them.
They
They didn't pick them up.
They didn't pick them up very much, but were there very many at that time?
Oh, yes, a whole lot. More than there are right now.
After a rain, I imagine you go up and pick up a few, couldn't you?
Oh, yes, you could pick up a lot of them at the time.
Adolph, going out now, you still find them occasionally, don't you? Down in the field, right?
Occasionally we find one or two now and then.
But other than that, you don't find, like, a cigar box full, like when we were talking earlier today, you mentioned finding one years and years ago. Is that right?
We're getting to the point where we have to dig for them.
That's right, and that's our business, and that's what we did this summer. I think Bill Kenny, sitting right across from me here, is probably the youngest archaeological student I had anything to do with, and Bill was quite a student. I might say that he kept the rest of the students about 6 years older than Bill, humping, you might say, going right along during the summer. I think the most interesting thing that has struck people that came down to the Kenny farm was how this Indian site, which was there for 2,000 years, was located. Almost everyone, wouldn't you say just about everyone that comes down there says, how did you find out that behind your house, Adolph, there was an Indian?
That's true. We found this campsite by, we started to find pieces of pottery, pieces of flint, occasionally an owl, a celt or two, in the creek bank. And as the cattle walked over the creek bank, they eroded the bank, and those pieces fell out of the dirt.
Now, tell the people where this site is, where this bank you're talking about, is related to your own home. How far would you say it is?
Well, the campsite is about 200 feet just in back of my house.
That's remarkable. Can you imagine everyone that going out into your backyard, literally, in fact, about 30 seconds walk, and digging up an Indian city? Now, that's what the Kennys can do right now. Frank, are you still digging down there?
Well, I am once in a while.
I might mention that Mr. Frank Kenny, if he can't be found out in the field, can be found down in the Indian village site with a shovel and a screen any day. It's quite remarkable, but it's getting too hard now, isn't it?
Too hard.
Work,
Very so too hard.
I understand that last week when I was down, you had come onto something interesting. Was it a deep pit or something? Or?
Yeah, deep pit. I found charcoal, ashes, and punt, needles.
Do you think it may be, what, a refuse pit or a garbage pit or something?
I kind of think so.
Well, I hope so. And maybe next spring when it gets thawed out, you can find more down there.
Well, I hope so.
I sure do, too. Another thing I'd like to ask, talk about the two students down there is, now, you've been on this farm many years, both of you gentlemen, and everything's been pretty quiet down there in the summertime. So what is it like to have a bunch of teenage and people in their early 20s, 16 or 14 or 16 numbers, come to your farm every morning at 5:30 or 6 o'clock and just not wake you up because you're up very early, but cause a clamor there every day for 2.5 months. I imagine it was quite an experience for you, wasn't it, Adolph?
Well, yes, it was, but after it went along for a little while, I got more acquainted, and it was just like one big family.
And it's remarkable how good these students were. What do you say? Now, for their age.
Yeah, for their age.
They were very young people, as I've explained, and they were some around the air earlier in my broadcast. They were young students that I've ever known went into archaeology, but it wasn't remarkable how, when it got hot outside and dry, how they would stick to their work and in a sense, be very good students. I mean, would this affect you? Or?
Oh, yes, that's fine.
They were a very good bunch of kids, all willing to work.
What about you, Bill? How did you like it working with hundreds of beings on time? You like it all right?
Well, kind of hot.
Yeah, but I might say that Bill has a horse, and whenever things got a little hard, he used to climb aboard the horse and take off. That was one thing about you. You could always take off if you wanted to, but the rest of the crew couldn't. However, I'd like to ask one more question about people, and this is even a more interesting thing. And that is, though the Kenny farm is located, I would say, 7 miles from the nearest hard road, would you say? Was that an accurate?
No, it's about 4 miles from Route 18.
That's by Henry, yeah. All right, the nearest hard road, right?
That's the
it's
nearest
in a
hard
sense
road.
that you might say fairly hard to get to unless you look for it.
That's
is that
right.
And yet, how many? Something less than 2,000 visitors over the entire period of time we've been digging there came to your site there on your farm. Is that right?
That's
Something
right.
Like that? And you kept a visitors book, didn't you?
We did.
And
Well, not all the way through.
Not all the way through.
We missed quite a few, but I think we got most of them.
that came down there. Find them interested? Are they interested in your own impression?
Yes, people were very interested, and through talking to these people that visited our campsite, we gained a lot of knowledge that we didn't have before about these people, and we also picked up some different ideas of that other people had about the people.
And weren't there people from California and other states here?
And we had people from 14 or 15 different states and 3 foreign countries visit us last summer.
Down there in the farm. That must have been quite an experience for you. I mean, having been there all the time and then here to come these people.
It sure was.
Remember that one Sunday? Remember that one Sunday when I came up? Luckily, I came late in the afternoon. How many people were there? 200 or some?
Something in the neighborhood of 200 one Sunday afternoon.
After, I think, the Kiwani paper had run a story on our diggings down there. Something, I think that's
right.
The story, wasn't it?
That's right.
But the people were pretty good, weren't they? I mean, wasn't that right, Frank?
Oh, yeah, they were awfully good.
And I might mention, everyone, that Frank has a little collection of his own. Little, that's a foolish thing. It's actually a very large collection in a room upstairs in his house. And I might mention that when I first came, the collection was strewn under beds and in boxes and everything else. And things became so interesting that Mrs. Kenny, Frank's wife, had to set aside a special room so that a little museum could be set up. And I think that's a pretty good idea, isn't it, Frank?
Oh, yes. If everything works out right, I'm going to build a small building outside next year.
You are? Is that right? You're going to find an awful lot of stuff down the village site from now on.
Well, I think so. I think we're going to find a lot of stuff.
Because we only dug every other square,
Sure.
and those squares in between have just as much. I don't know why they shouldn't, as a matter of fact. That leads me to the next question, which I wanted to ask you for everyone, and that is, what about the site in the future? Now, we may go ahead digging there if we can get these proper funds. If we can't, I know now you asked us to leave the site open, and it's left open, not filled in, and you're going to go on digging there, aren't you?
Well, I hope you folks will come down with me.
We hope that you can come back and spend at least another summer there with us. If you don't, why, we'll leave it open and we'll spend our odd time digging there ourselves.
Yeah, and that would be the idea of using your building, your little museum, to house all the things you found down there. What are you going to do with all these thousands of relics that we found? Are you going to keep all this pottery? Now, as I may have told everyone here, all these almost 500 boxes of relics that we found last summer are being studied, and when they're finished being studied, they're being turned back to the Kennys. And are you going to keep all that material in this museum?
You'll have to ask Steve about that.
Well, we'll keep most of it, we think. There will be a lot of pieces, will be duplicates, and there won't be any need of keeping all the duplicates. What we'll do with those, we don't know. Probably give them to some museums or something of that order.
I understand that the University of Michigan would like a representative collection of your pottery. And are you going to give them that, or?
I'm going to see that the University of Michigan gets their collection of pottery.
That's fine. That's excellent, because it means a lot to them. They're sort of the coordinators of all this business. Our time is beginning to run out. We could go on with this conversation forever, and as we have. Every time we come down there, we talk about one angle of this, or else, lately, duck hunting. However, that's another story which you won't go into now. The Kennys are incidentally right in the middle of the best duck hunting country in the state of Illinois. I'd like to ask one question now. Mr. Frank and Adolph Kenny, I don't believe had any real introduction to archaeology before we first showed up with this Illinois Valley expedition. And both Frank and Adolph have watched and worked in this business of archaeology closer than any people that I've ever seen on whose land I've worked. And I'd like to ask them a couple of questions, in a sense putting them on a spot right now. And that is, for the first time having seen this business go about, Frank, are you impressed at all with this business of archaeology? I mean, does it seem to you to have any, worthwhile? Does it have any value at all?
Sure I do.
I ask it to people because sometimes people think it's a lot of digging for no good at all, you know.
Sure.
Well, I think it's going to, in time, change the history of our country a whole lot. Our children are starting to study about these people 2,000 years ago and their history today. And when I went to school, we didn't know anything about the Indians, only the Indians that were here when Columbus came to this country.
And the Indians we were finding this summer were almost the time of Christ.
That's right.
I believe that same thing, and that's why I'm in this business. But it's interesting to hear you say this, having not come in contact with this at all before. I might say we had some famous visitors down here this summer, didn't we? When
we sure did.
Well, I think our time is up, is it? Yes. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it over now to our announcer, and then I'm going to come back with a word about our next week's broadcast.
Thank you, Stuart. One of the great industries in the Tri-Cities, of which we're justly proud, is the Caris Chemical Company, LaSalle. Caris is the only producer in the United States of potassium permanganate. They also produce hydroquinine and manganese sulfate, all used by industry, drugs, commerce, and by our armed forces, all for better, safer living. Caris Chemical Company has always done its utmost to keep a high standard of living in this area. Their records show that they've done a good job, too. They've been in the Tri-Cities for many, many years. During this time, they've always held a high level of employment and wages. Caris Chemical Company is proud to be associated with the Tri-Cities. Proud that so many Tri-City folks call them our company. Now a final word from Stuart Struever.
One question I forgot to mention, and that is, are visitors still allowed to go down to your farm, Adolph?
They are, but there isn't much that can be seen right now. Later in the spring, as the ground is thawed out, why, visitors will again be welcome.
Okay, good. So people go on down and see the site next spring. I think you'd enjoy it. Next week, we're going to have a special Christmas program. What was life across from Starved Rock in a freezing village in 1684? Come and listen with me. Until then, this is Stuart Struever with a tale of buried Kaskaskia.